Good morning. Today is Monday. Um, we're back. We're back on a weekly schedule, 6 days a week. It's Monday morning. Today we're learning Perek Vav of the Sheviis, and okay. Today's shir is sponsored Lila Nishmas Aaron Nachum ben Simcha Cohen, Yeshua Mordechai ben Shepsel, Bracha Sarah Bashmol Leib, Binam Moshe ben Yosef ben Neshamas Havan and refuah shlema to Ada Sar Baslev so Shar Choli Yisrael. Okay, let's go. So when we talk, we know Shemitah applies in Eretz Yisrael, but what parts of Eretz Yisrael? So they only apply to the parts of Eretz Yisrael that were mekudesh by the Jewish people. There were two acts of sanctification in two different periods of history. The first was performed by Joshua ben Nun when they went into Eretz Yisrael 40 years after Yitzie Mitzrayim, and this kedusha came to an end some 800 years later when the first base of Israel was destroyed, and everyone was sent to exile in Bavel. Then the land was mekudesh again by Ezra, who brought the nation back to Eretz Yisrael after the 70 years of Galus Bavel, after the Perek story. But Ezra's Kedusha Haaretz did not end with the Churban Beis Hamikdash, but is still in effect today. But not all the parts of Eretz Yisrael had been that were sanctified by Yeshua were re-sanctified by Ezra. As a result, the Hilchos Shemitah in some parts of Eretz Yisrael are not the same as in others. I mean, I guess the question you could ask is like, why did the Kedusha fall off during those 70 years, and why is it still no game? After the Galus of Baisheni, those are questions for a different share, not for today. So let's begin. Shalosh art. We bring the Mishnah Aleph and Perek Vav. Shalosh artzos the Sheviis. There are three types of lands with respect to the laws of Shemitah. Number one, Kol shehachziku ole bava me'eretz Yisrael ad kaziv. All the territory taken by those that came up from Bavel, which extends from the southern Eretz Yisrael to Kaziv in the north, have the full kedusha of Eretz Yisrael. Lo nechel, lo nevad. And so Shemitah produce cannot be eaten after the Zman HaBiur, unless Biur was already performed, and the land may not be worked on the year of Shemitah. That's one. There's no negotiation about that. Number two, V'kol she'exziku olim Mitzrayim mikaziv ad hanahar v'ad hamana. And all the territory taken by those who came up from Mitzrayim, but not the ones who returned from Bavel. So it was taken in round one, but not taken in round two, which includes the area extending from the Kaziv to the Jordan River in the east, and the area extending from Kaziv to Amana in the west, like along the Mediterranean Sea. So all those areas are treated as Eretz Yisrael to some degree, meaning being that Kaziv itself is in the first classification, but the second classification is from the borders of Kaziv to the east and the border of Kaziv to the west, not including Kaziv itself. So in those areas, Nachal Avalo Navad. So in those areas, the Shemitah produce may be eaten without the beer requirement having been fulfilled, but the land may not be worked. And the third one, right to the second category, since the original sanctification was not from Yeshua is no longer in force, um, uh, then that which grew during Shemitah may be eaten without beer, but nevertheless, the Chacham make a zero that the land may not be worked on Shemitah, even though it was no longer classified under the second group. But and the third and the third category, min hanar miyamana lifnin, the territory that extends farther to the north from the river and Amana is not part of Eretz Yisrael at all. So you have that like latitude of Kaziv, which to the east goes to the river, and to the west goes to the sea. Right. So anything that's under there falls into categories 1 and 2. Anything that's north of that line is not considered part of Eretz Yisrael, and um, Nechel and Nevad can be eaten without beer, and the land may be worked. Now, what part of is that nowadays? Where's Kaziv nowadays? I'm not really sure. Um, Good question. We'll have to look that up at a different time. So now Mishnah Beis talks about the land of Syria, which was conquered by David HaMelech. Because he took Syria on his own initiative before all of Eretz Yisrael was conquered, his action is considered as a kibush yachid, a individual conquest, which does not suffice to make the land part of Eretz Yisrael. However, the Chachamim treated Syria like Eretz Yisrael in some respects. For example, in Eretz Yisrael proper, the Torah asks working with attached produce, being produce that has not been detached from its natural place of growth, unless one does so in an unusual manner. Furthermore, the Chachamim said that even work done with detached produce, meaning threshing and winnowing, must be done in a unusual manner. So now we'll learn about this in this Mishnah. Osim betalish besuria, the Mishnah Beis. We may process detached Shemitah produce of Syria in the usual manner, even though it's rabbinically forbidden in Eretz Yisrael proper. In this respect, the Chachamim treated Syria more leniently than Eretz Yisrael proper. But we may not process attached produce of Syria in the usual manner, because regarding this, the Chachamim did treat Syria like Eretz Yisrael. So the Torah asks one to process Shemitah produce and is still attached to its source, unless he does so with a shinoi. So the Rabbanan said that restriction applies in Syria as well. Syria is not. It's important to know Syria is not counted as a fourth land, in addition to the 3 listed in the previous Mishnah, because the law in Syria is the same as the law in the areas Eretz Yisrael conquered only by Joshua, and therefore everything that applied in Mishnah Aleph applies in Mishnah Beis as well. It just wasn't reclassified. It wasn't reclassified by Ezra. Okay, so let's do some examples of these rulings. Dashim, Vizarin, Vidarchin, Amrin. We may thresh and winnow grain. We can crush grapes and gather produce in the usual manner in Syria, since these activities are done with produce that has been detached from its source. I have a low coat stream, below boats, below musket. But we may not harvest the grain, grapes, or olives in the usual manner, because this is done with produce that's still on the tree or in the ground. So the Mishnah concludes, Klal Amar Rabbi Akiva said a rule, Kosh Yotze Mutab Eretz Yisrael Osin Oso Besuria. Any work the likes of which is permitted in Eretz Yisrael in the usual manner according to Torah law, may be performed in the usual manner in Syria, even according to rabbinic law. Mishnah Gimel. Okay. Betsalim sheyardu aleim geshamim v'tzimchu. If onions were picked in the 6th year, they were replanted in Shemitah illegally, of course. Then rain fell on them and they grew more on Shemitah. Im hayu ha'alin shalehem shchurin asurim. So if the halacha is that if their leaves became dark green, which shows that they drew nutrients from the ground of Shemitah, they are asur. The leaves and the onions are subject to all the Shemitah halachos regarding produce. Hariku elohen utari. However, if the leaves became pale, it shows that they did not grow from the ground, but from the onions themselves. They are mutter. They are not considered Shemitah produce. Rabbi Chanina ben Atinus Omer. Chanina ben Atinus says, Im yicholin li talish be'alin shlehen asurin. If the onions can be plucked from the ground by their leaves, which is a sign that the leaves are strong, they are forbidden as Shemitah produce, even if the leaves remained pale and did not darken. Keneged kain motzi Sheviis mutarin. In the opposite case, when the onions grew during Shemitah and then grew again after Shemitah, they are mutter, but they're not subject to the Shemitah halachos. Meaning that if the onions are replanted and picked during the 8th year, they become ordinary 8th year produce. Just as the Shemitah growth made them usher, so too the 8th year growth. The 8th year growth makes them mutter again. Mishnah Daled. Me'emasai mutter adam likach yarak b'matzi Sheviis. From when after Shemitah is a person allowed to buy vegetables in the market and treat them as ordinary produce? Mishiyasek yotzebo. From when it has reached the same level of ripeness as the produce that is being sold in the market. You have a similar concept by Shabbos. If someone cooked food on Shabbos that was usher, so how long after Shabbos can he eat it? It's only after enough time for it to have been made fresh Motzi Shabbos. The similar thing over here, that reaches the same level of ripeness as the produce that's being sold in the market. You have enough time for it to get to that, which is probably a few months. Asa habakir hutter ha'afil. When the early ones become ripe, they permit the late ones, meaning that if a species ripens early in one place, one is permitted to buy the same type of produce even in a place where it ripens later. So let me assume that it came from the place to where it ripens early. Rabbi Hiter Likach Yarek Sheviis Miyad. Rabbi, he was more makel, and he allowed someone to buy vegetables immediately after Shemitah and treat them as non-Shemitah produce because most of these vegetables sold in Eretz Yisrael were imported from outside the country, so a buyer could assume that he was buying produce that did not grow in Eretz Yisrael at all. Mishnah Hey, two more to go, so hang tight. This is very important. This comes up every Shemitah. We may not export oil of Terumah that must be burned, or Shemitah produce from Eretz Yisrael to outside Eretz Yisrael because it's the procedures that they will require, meaning to burn the Terumah oil that became tamei, or the Shemitah produce, the beer must be done in Eretz Yisrael. There's a whole machlokas whether you have to return the esrogim of Shemitah, which is for the 8th year, because they grow during the 7th year, and you use the Shemitah esrogim. There's a whole machlokas whether they have to be returned to Eretz Yisrael or not. Many persons will say that they do have to be returned so that they can be be handled with the beer properly, which is usually Pesach time. And others will say that no, because by the time Pesach comes around, the sorghum are all shriveled up anyways. Then they then there's no longer a Shemitah on the sorghum, and the beer doesn't apply. I once heard a story where a guy wanted to make sure they brought his sorghum back to Eretz Yisrael, so he brought like a bag of sorghum on the plane. And when he got off the plane, the sorghum were confiscated at the airport, and he's like, "Great, you could take them. My job is to get them to Eretz Yisrael. Whatever you do with them now is your problem." So he got them to Eretz Yisrael, and then they were no longer his problem. Rabbi Shimon says, continuing, Mishnah Hey, Shamati Beperush Shemotzian Syria. I heard explicitly that we may export these items from the land of Israel to Syria, but we may not export them to other places outside the land of Israel. Because Syria is considered part of Eretz Yisrael, even according to the Torah law, and therefore they can go back and forth. And finally, Mishnah Vav for today, that's the last one. Ein Mavi'in Truma Michutz La'aretz La'aretz. We may not import Truma from outside Eretz Yisrael to Eretz Yisrael, because if this were allowed, then Kohanim might leave Eretz Yisrael to obtain Truma. Because if you were allowed to bring Truma into Eretz Yisrael from other countries, Kohanim might leave the land to get Truma and bring it back with them, and this would violate the general prohibition against any Jew, whether they're a Kohen or not, about leaving Eretz Yisrael. Therefore, they decreed that the Truma may not be imported into Eretz Yisrael. This would discourage the Kohanim from leaving Eretz Yisrael to obtain Truma, for if they cannot bring it back with them, they would not go to get it there in the first place. I mean, how much Truma is coming from Chutz La'aretz? I thought you don't give Truma in Chutz La'aretz. Different question. Rabbi Shimon says, Shemati Peperish Shemavian Syria. I heard explicitly that we may import Truma into land in Israel from Syria. But we may not import Truma into land of Israel from places outside the land, because as we said before, Syria had some status like Eretz Yisrael, and therefore they could go back and forth. I guess in that note, it wasn't a problem for Kohanim to go to Syria and back and forth either. Okay, that's all for today. Let's have a wonderful day.